So we know the GOP endorsed Jeff Johnson as governor candidate, and you challenged him. So why do you believe you would be a stronger candidate within GOP to win the election?
Right. Yeah, so Jeff Johnson and I are the two Republicans running in the primary, and I think we're campaigning in ways that people can discern some differences, but one of the differences is you can't do any of the things that we just talked about, including fixing or getting rid of the data disaggregation law, unless you win the election. And Jeff Johnson and I have both been on the ballot twice in Minnesota for statewide office. I won twice. He lost twice. In fact, we were on the ballot the same year together. That year was 2006. It was a very bad year for Republicans generally. President Bush was in office, and it was a tough year. I won statewide in Minnesota. I was the only Republican to do so, barely, but I did. And he lost by 12 or more points. Wasn't even close. And coincidentally, against Lori Swanson, they were running for Attorney General, and she's running for governor now too, and so is he. So first of all, if you want to win, you might want to pay attention to that fact. Two is, I think you got to be able to have a vision for the state of Minnesota and an agenda that resonates with the Republican base, which is really important. I can do that and demonstrated that time and time again. But you also got to be able to get some support from people who are not yet Republicans. And I think I can do a better job at that as well.
Thank you. Second question. I hear some people from the community or from other communities saying that you are establishment, and if you are elected, you won't do anything differently from Mark Dayton. So what is your response to that? Thank you.
So the question is, what's the difference between, say, Mark Dayton or the Democrats and me? And the answer to that is, I hope, obvious, but if it's not, let me give you a couple of specifics, lots of specifics. The Democrats want to raise your taxes. I don't. The Democrats will run spending through the roof. Since I left office, they increased state spending 50%, 5-0, in 8 years. I had the lowest rate of growth when I was governor of state spending in the modern history of the state. The Democrats will want the government to take over the healthcare system like I described before. I want patients and doctors to be in charge of the healthcare system. The Democrats are opposed to work requirements for able-bodied and able-minded folks on welfare or public assistance. I think it's appropriate to encourage people who are able-bodied and able-minded to be training for work or looking for work and not stay on government assistance indefinitely. They have a view of education that is just push more money in. I have a view that we should increase funding to our schools, but we need to also demand accountability and modernization, not just here's some more money and keep doing the same thing and getting the same results. They believe in sort of identity politics where each little subgroup is identified, and by the way, that's why they want this data disaggregation issue, and they play little identity politics with each little subgroup. I think we have common values in Minnesota and in the United States, and we should all come together regardless of our skin color, ethnic background, or the like, and be one community, one America, one Minnesota. We shouldn't have this little identity politics, and that's why they want that data. And so those are some big differences, and to Jeff, my opponent on the Republican side, or other Republicans who say that, keep in mind, Jeff Johnson has been in office his whole life. He has been in the state legislature. He was a Republican National Committee man. He went on to be the Hennepin County Commissioner. So he talks about all of these bold reforms that he's going to do, but he's been in one office or the other for almost his entire adult life. And you know how many of them he's actually done? Zero. Zero. So that's why I called him yesterday during the debates the pretender, the poser, because it's all talk. None of it is an actual outcome or an achievement. If you want to be a leader, you actually have to accomplish something, because I don't think giving speeches and talking or sitting in a chair really qualifies as getting things done.
Thank you. And one more question from me, and I will let other people ask questions. So the other question is, would you prefer a big government or small government? And how would you give the power back to the people? Thank you.
Well, here's how one of the measures, so the question was, do you prefer big government or small government? The answer is small government. Government does important things, but it should do a limited number of things and do them well. But to give you some data around government growth, since about 1960 to present, with the exception of the time that I was governor, the average 2-year rate of growth in the state of Minnesota's budget was between 15 and 20% a budget cycle. Now those are 2-year budget cycles, but that's at a time, most of the time, when the private economy was growing 2 to 3% a year. So for example, right now, you have the private economy as measured by GDP or inflation, around 2 to 3%, 2% for inflation, maybe a little more for GDP. And yet government spending is going up wildly faster than that. And so government should not be growing much beyond the rate of growth of the private economy, and hopefully even below that. But the point is, there's only one person in the modern history of the state who's actually accomplished that. The average rate of growth of government during my time as governor was about 1.5% a year. That is the best record of keeping a lid on government spending in 50 years. So, and that included one period of time where spending actually was reduced 1 year. And so if you're interested in sort of slowing down the growth of government to try to get closer to how families can pay for it, or businesses can pay for it, or the private economy can pay for it, there's only one person who's done that in 50 years, and he's talking to you right now.
And I believe more people will have questions for you. If you don't mind, I would like the count to start.
Okay, a very quick question. So you have already served as a governor for 2 terms. What's your major motivation to pursue a third one?
Yes, the main reason I want to run for governor again is not because I need the title, I already have it. I don't need to go sit in the office, I already did that. I want to try to get things done for the state of Minnesota, and I'm very worried about what will happen if the liberals, or what I call the socialists, get in charge of government in Minnesota, particularly the governor's office. So as I mentioned before, they have a very different view of the future of the state of Minnesota. And I think the election is about what kind of state do you want Minnesota to be. And those differences I highlighted a minute ago really highlight my priorities compared to the Democrats. And the main reason I'm doing it is because I thought the Republican candidates who were in the race were weak and were going to lose. And that we needed a stronger candidate who could win so we could actually ensure a better future for the state of Minnesota, and that's why I got in the race.
Thank you. Tim, next question.
Sorry. I have a question before we discuss about, because you have been a governor before, and we are wondering what's the difference when you are being a governor in your administration, and also what's the difference from your administration from current administration governor. What's the difference you're going to do?
Sure. So I think this got covered earlier, but it's a great question. What's the difference between current administration and also the difference between when I was governor last time? So when I was governor last time, we had 2 big recessions. I got elected in 2002. There was a huge recession then. We had a near depression nationally and globally in 2007, 2008. There were 2 wars raging. Iraq and Afghanistan, they're still going on, but not quite at the level that they were back then. So the circumstances were challenging then. Economic circumstances nationally and globally are better now. And the types of things I want to get done were those things that I mentioned earlier. They're also the types of things that stand in contrast to the current administration. We need to tax relief, education reform, healthcare reform. I think we need to crack down on illegal immigration while keeping our tradition of legal immigration intact and do it in a smart way. I think we need to make sure that our government isn't overreaching on data issues and more. So those are some of the differences.
Thank you. So your hand.
This table here has a lot of questions.
Thank you very much for coming. Sorry, echoing. I think as a small business person, I'm really glad what you're talking about the healthcare and getting government make business a lot easier to work with. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you working with the Chinese community. Thank you for that. So my original question is, what you really think of Jeff Johnson? But I think you really addressed that one. My second question is, God forbid, if the people here does not make a difference in the primary, would you still run in the general election? And I wish you do.
Well, I feel pretty good about our chances in the primary, so I don't think this will be a real issue. But you can't run if you don't win the primary. So you have to decide in June, by June, what you're filing for, Democrat, Republican, and the like. And the only way on the ballot in Minnesota is you got to win the primary of your party. So the whole convention process and party process is interesting, but it's really just a recommendation or an advisory process. The legal way you get on the ballot in Minnesota is winning the primary. So if you lose the primary, you're out. There's no way to go on from there. But I don't think you're going to have to worry about that because I think you can win the primary. Yes, sir.
I think that there are rumors, and yeah, I think there are rumors. You don't support. You don't support.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Now we can hear you.
Yeah, I think there are rumors that you don't support President Trump. Do you have an answer for that?
Yes, short answer is I agree with almost all of President Trump's policy priorities, but I don't like some of his language and behavior. I think that's where most people are at. Yes, ma'am.
I'll just follow up with the question. So, just follow up with this question. So, just mentioned you are kind of considered as an establishment, right, in the Republican Party. But Donald Trump is not, and he has a lot of supporters. How would you, I guess, can do to motivate the base, which is really not, traditional Republicans? And I think that would help get a chance to win.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's to labels that people put on, rather than putting the label on, just look at what I've done. So, again, when I was governor, conservative court for the first time in the modern history of Minnesota, cut taxes overall during my time as governor, held spending to the lowest rate of growth in 50 years, work requirements in welfare for people who are able-bodied and able-minded, signed concealed carry into law, and a big Second Amendment supporter, and signed concealed carry twice, only governor in the state nation to do that. Had market-based, not government-based healthcare reforms. And outside groups like the very libertarian Cato Institute gave just a few governors in the entire country an A grade for being the opposite of establishment, and I was one of those governors. So I think if anybody who's fair-minded and fairly informed looked at my record of accomplishment, they would say I got more done on behalf of disruption and reform than any governor, at least from a conservative perspective, in the modern history of the state. So I'm proud of that record, and it's not an establishment record, it's a reform and conservative record. And again, compared to what? If that's compared to my opponent, he has been in office for 20 years and has accomplished almost nothing. So I'll put my record of accomplishment up against his any day. And so he talks about being a disruptor and all this stuff. He's disrupted nothing, led nothing, accomplished nothing. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
First of all, thank you for coming, and really appreciate your spending time with us. Your references to all the affordable care related bundle payment approaches really resonate with me.
You must be in healthcare if you know the term bundled payment.
So, building on the question that Wei had earlier about alignment with presidential election, what's your view on the escalating tariff that's going on between the two countries, China and the United States? Do do you see that as the way to do, really achieve the end goal of bringing fairness back to the trade business, or do you feel there's a better way to do it? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think the president, I do applaud him for trying to get a better deal. And if he actually gets a better deal, then I think we'll all say that was a good outcome. But if he doesn't get a better deal, or it takes so long that in the meantime it causes all this collateral damage, for example, on Minnesota farmers, because they're the ones being subjected to some of the tariffs, that's a big concern and a big problem. So my hope is that the president can succeed in getting the better deal, and that we can avert what looks to be like an escalating trade war. But in order for that to work, he's got to get the deal done relatively soon. Now, he did put $12 billion of temporary relief into for farmers and some others who are being impacted by the tariffs, but that's not going to make them whole, and it's not going to last forever. So the clock is ticking. So this is one area where, even though I agree with him on tax policy, defense, and lots of other things, this is an area where it concerns me greatly, and I think he's got to either get the deal done soon, or we're going to have escalating problems on parts of our economy, particularly like our farmers here in Minnesota. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I really appreciate one of the key points you mentioned, education. It's so important to prepare for the future workforce. But without giving the same amount of money as Democrats given, I can tell you, most educators can testify small class size works as far as educating youngsters. But without giving the same amount of money as Democrats put into education, will the class size be increased, decrease, or stay the same as now? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it depends on what local school districts do with the money. And so you have to know that most of the money in the way schools operating money goes to people, because it's a people-intensive business, and that's understandable. But they get a certain amount of money from the state and their local taxpayers, and sometimes they enter into negotiations with their staff that exceeds the amount of money that's projected to come in. And if you've noticed, our schools in Minnesota are very often in financial crisis. Even now in times of recovery, with a governor who's a Democrat, we have many school districts who are in financial crisis. And one of the reasons they're in financial crisis is because they often enter into agreements that exceed their revenue. And that has to do a lot with how they negotiate with their employees. So class size is an important thing, and I think it's something that could be helpful. But if you look at the research around class size, you have to get it down to a certain level before it starts to make measurable difference. But it is an important thing, and I think we should ask our local school districts, as we give them more money, to reserve some of the money for controlling class size, or containing or reducing class size, because that is most important, I think, or one of the top things for educators, one of the top things for parents. I'm getting criticized by one of my Democratic opponents in a TV ad right now on education, but if you go back and look at the Department of Education's data from the time I became governor, from the time I left governor, statewide, varies a little bit locally, the ratio of students to licensed faculty.
Plenty on YouTube, there are a bunch of ads criticizing your policies. For example, one ad stated that your policies made healthcare premiums skyrocket and led to multiple teacher layoffs. What are your responses to these criticisms, and how are you going to improve your image on social media platforms like YouTube?
Yes. On the education one, we just covered that. On the health insurance one, the ad I think is inaccurate, and we can pull out some different data to show that. But one thing to keep in mind is I'm going to get criticized for having cut spend. I did. Not on everything, but many things. And so for those who don't like that, keep in mind in 2007, 2008, the global economy and the national economy crashed, and we had a near depression. A near depression. So people were losing their houses, losing their jobs, having their paychecks reduced, not increased. And my Democratic friends, what they wanted to do on the verge of a depression is go to the people and raise their taxes. And I said, I'm not going to do that. What I said is I expect government to tighten its belt just like families are having to do it, just like individuals are having to do it, just like businesses are having to do it, and for the cities and the school districts and the others, including parts of government that say, no, we're not going to tighten our belts. We want to keep spending more, just like we always had, even though the rest of the economy has crashed globally and nationally. I thought was unfair, and I didn't feel comfortable in the middle of a near depression, going back to the people of Minnesota saying, you pay more, instead of saying, government, tighten your belts. I chose to tighten your belts. So if the accusation is, did I cut spending? Yeah, I did. Yep.
So, while you were in office, what were some things that you really enjoyed doing while you were working for Minnesota?
Well, every day, if you're governor, if you like to learn, you get to learn. So you'll meet all day long with educators, scientists, school kids, students, homemakers, inventors, people who are visiting from foreign countries, people who have certain needs or concerns or ideas and suggestions. One day it might be data disaggregation, the next day it might be public transit. And so one of the more enjoyable parts of the job is every day was an enormous learning experience. And one of the other enjoyable parts of the job is I like people, and you get to be with people all day long and meet new people each day and every day, and they tell you interesting things that you can learn from, and it's fun, and then you get to try to do something good and meaningful. And I think if you can get up every day and learn new things, meet interesting people, and try to do good things, that's a good day. And so that's why I wanted to do that. I guess we're going to do one more. How about the gentleman with the t-shirt, keys to happiness. Your name's over the second key. What is it? Ah, right.
We truly appreciate you for coming, Mr. Plenty. I have a question on cultural diversity. My name is Brian. I currently serve as the chair for the Asian American Network at Ameriprise. And my question is, I have to disclose this, because my question is not representative of my company, but rather as on my behalf. So. There's only so much that we can do as individual contributors at companies to push for cultural diversity. When you run for office, what are some of the plans that you plan to advocate for cultural diversity from the top down?
Well, one of the things you can do is be aware of it. The second thing you can do is have a team that you have as commissioners, cabinet members, and others that reflect the faces and voices and perspectives of Minnesota today and tomorrow. Another thing you can do is make an effort to have affirmative outreach to diverse communities, to make sure the lines of communication are open, friendships are established and maintained, and that takes interest and time and effort. The governor can do that as well. But I want to make sure that we don't drift back to what I said earlier, which is do what the Democrats do, which is identity politics, which is you're either this little group or that little group, and we have special rules and special things for each little group. And pretty soon, if everybody's their own little group, you don't have a country anymore, as the president says. And so we want to celebrate different cultures and backgrounds and make sure we are welcome and fair and open and outreaching to all communities. But I also don't want to set up an expectation that it's a quota system or each little group has its own separate rules and their own separate identities, because then we lose the common perspective that we need to be a state and a country.
Thank you, Kim.
All right. Yes.
Sorry, I know time is really tight. We have one more question from 8th grader to B.
All right. Well, this will be our last one. 8th grader to B.
Governor Plenty, I'm here because...
Nice shirt, by the way.
I'm here because I have a concern, and I would like to hear your thoughts on that. So a while ago, after school in the public library, I saw a couple of 6th graders in the bathroom vaping. I know that's illegal because pretty sure you have to be 18 years of age to purchase and use to vape. And vaping is considered as tobacco products, so it's illegal to use in public places. So if you are elected governor again, what would you do to take actions against this type of problem?
Yeah, if I understood your question correctly, there were some people vaping in your 7th grade school, right?
In the public library's bathroom.
Public libraries bathroom. So that's against current rules and laws, and so that's an enforcement issue. So we have rules on the books to address that already, and unfortunately, it sounds like the library didn't have either the attention or the resources or the time or the ability to detect it and stop it. So I'm sorry that that happened, but there are already rules on the books to say that shouldn't happen. It's a matter of enforcing the rules better. All right, thank you for listening. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming out and giving me part of your Saturday. I appreciate it very much.